I want to welcome Partner Hero, the Hansel Minute sponsor family. They provide customer service outsourcing that's built for the needs of scaling and high-growth startups. Partner Hero offers flexible terms, fast onboarding, and the ability to scale teams quickly, which is perfect for fast-growing businesses. In my experience, outsourcing tends to have a bad reputation as being exploitative and low quality, but Partner Hero's values-based approach will raise the bar for the outsourcing industry by investing in employee empowerment and focusing on career growth. They pay above-market salaries, and they maintain a focus on quality and performance. They also offer these flexible terms for you to scale quickly, which is perfect for startups. They bake quality assurance into every program, and they have offices around the world, so they can provide a truly global coverage. That means onshore, nearshore, and offshore. Outsourcing has long been available to big enterprise businesses, but Partner Hero is challenging the business as usual and bringing those benefits to startups. Short, flexible contracts, fast ramp-up times, values integrity, and expertise. If you're ready to bring in outside customer support help for your startup that feels like it's a part of your existing team, check out Partner Hero. Head on over to partnerhero.com/HanselMinutes. You can book a free consultation with their solutions team, mention you heard about Partner Hero from Hansel Minutes, and they'll waive the setup fee. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Josh Twist, co-founder and CEO at Zuplo API Management. How are you, sir?
I am awesome. It's great to be on Hansel Minutes. Can I say that thing where it's a first time caller, long time listener? I've said it the wrong way around, but I've been listening to this for years.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we're coming up on 940 episodes. We'll hit 1,000 soon. I got to figure out. Someone said, should I celebrate 1,000 episodes or 1,024 episodes?
The gigabyte versus the, yeah, sure. I think it's got to be 1,000. You got to do it 1,000.
Yeah, I got to celebrate the round numbers. That's true. Cool. So, you and I have known each other for many, many years, but I haven't actually talked to you in nigh a decade.
No, 8 years or so, I think.
Yeah, 8 years. You're one of those people that is out there doing cool stuff. I was talking to a friend of mine about the maintenance of friendships in the 21st century when social media, where you're in someone's brain and you see their kids grow up, you see their Facebooks, you see their Instagrams. And, I haven't talked to you in 8 years, but nothing's changed. We slipped right back in like a comfortable shoe.
Yeah.
It's funny how that is. It makes me a little bit sad, but it's also funny how that works.
No, it's nice though, isn't it? When you reconnect, and I mean, there was just a lot of stuff to catch up on, isn't there? So feels like it didn't feel like it was 8 years, put it that way.
Yeah, I still refuse to admit that it was. So, you were a principal PM at Microsoft for a number of years. You worked on workflow. You worked as an application developer. You worked as a PM, and you did API management. Then you went to Facebook. You went to Stripe. When did you decide, and how did you decide that it was time to start your own company?
Oh, good question. And a little bit of an emotional story, actually. So, I was part of the team that launched Azure API Management through an acquisition. We acquired a company called Epiphany. That's 10 years ago. It was October 2013. I looked it up, the announcement on TechCrunch. And at the time, I always thought there was an opportunity to do something a little bit different in that space. And I kind of sat and watched for 10 years. And then I joined Stripe in, it would have been 2021, I guess, early 2021. And was leading product there for their payment methods team. So still more API stuff, looking after all their APIs and all the different API methods around the world. And then sadly, about 3 weeks into joining Stripe, which is a great company, my mom passed away suddenly. And she was pretty young. She was only 20 years older than me. And an event like that really just makes you kind of question your priorities, and kind of grew up in a poor background. So I sort of enjoyed working at Big Co and the financial security that offered. No offense to Stripe, but did I want to work on making ACH debits 3% faster? Or did I want to, take that leap and go and build this company that I'd had in mind for some time? And so that was kind of the catalyst that made me go do it.
And the company had been in your head for a while. It's one of those things where you have a thing you can't get out of your brain, but you need that push to make that leap.
It's funny you say that because I founded it with another ex-Microsoft guy who you worked with. If you remember, Nate Totten used to work with you on all the keynotes at Build and so on. And when we started working on it, it was like a design poured out of my head because I'd already thought about what the UI looked like, what the controls looked like, how this thing worked, and that it was all text-based. Like more or less everything was there. And we just put it down to paper and started building.
I'm curious, and this might be an awkward question, when you have that confidence that you know what the design is going to look like, where does that confidence come from? You knew this space, you knew how you wanted it to be, and it poured out of you, right? Did you ever think maybe this wasn't the right architecture? But you seem to always know, and it's very opinionated. And it's like, this is how it should have been designed from the start.
There was a Rick Rubin interview recently that's gone kind of viral where he says you got to build for yourself. If you're a musical artist, you create the music for yourself. And if you really focus on that, your audience, the right audience will love it. And so I just thought about the product I would want to use in this space. And I'm very much like an engineering background. I still write code. Actually, I wrote most of the actual gateway myself. I don't do that so much these days. And so I just applied that mind, and that was what gave me confidence. But I will say it was a hypothesis. Can we, the first thing I wanted to test is, I had the comfy job at these big organizations, and taking a risk like this, the first thing I wanted to prove is this a good idea, or is this just me, riffing here? And that was one of the first things we wanted to get through, to be honest.
All right. So let's talk about what Zuplo is. It's a serverless gateway, and it is sitting between your client and your backend API. It's basically a proxy for the backend, or what they call the origin API. So like let's just use an example. I have an API that manages my blood sugar. That blood sugar API exists in one server in one location. So me accessing it from Australia is going to have a different experience than me accessing it from Europe or Chicago, where it's hosted. And then me accessing it from an iPhone, in this case, or a Windows machine, it's all the same because it's just me directly talking to that backend API. Why do I need something in between me and my origin API?
So there's two phases to the story. The first one I'll talk about is smaller businesses. So if you think about shipping an API that somebody else is going to use today, the bar's really been set quite high. Most people sort of think of Stripe as the gold standard, actually, as like having the best developer experience. Whether that's true or not today is debatable, but that's still how people hold it. To get to that point now, you don't just build an API and build all your routes. You need good developer documentation. You need self-serve key management. You need great analytics on the API. You need protection. If you launch an API, your partner, it's never anonymous attacking you. Your partner or your internal developers will take you down with a clumsy for loop. Like, that's what's going to happen. And seriously, the number of conversations I have where that's like, someone says to me, I'm not interested, I don't need rate limiting, and they call me back in a month. I'm like, yeah. One of our developers did use effect wrongly in React, and our whole back end went down.
I love that term, though, the clumsy for loop, because that's exactly what it is. When something feels slow or when something hangs, I'm just like, I think I'm in some dude's for loop right now. I'm just stuck.
I think you're taking down our own back end. Yep. So all these horizontal things you need to have a kind of Stripe quality experience. So Zuplo for smaller businesses, that out of the box. Literally, we will just accelerate your time to getting to that quality of experience to offer to your developers. We think engineers, like I know you are sort of craftspeople. It's actually something I got from Guthrie. I remember a speech he gave when I was back at Microsoft about being a craftsman. We really care about what we put into the world. We want other developers to like it. And so when you put your API out there, you want people to like what you've done and be able to use it and think, this is cool, this is great. So we try and help you do that. And then at the larger end, we have large customers who, what it's like at these, at the extreme scale. There's hundreds of teams working on hundreds of APIs, or thousands of APIs maybe. If you just let every team run independently and like choose their own open source auth package and their own rate limiting implementation, that just becomes an unmanageable sprawl for a single organization. So that's where API management really gets the management term from. And you want a single pane of glass, a single sort of choke point, which is the management plane where you can ensure you've got consistent authentication, rate limiting, all that stuff, documentation for everybody to use, analytics across what's going on across the whole enterprise. And so that's kind of the two primary use cases of the product.
So is it about responsibility, like what I should be in the business of, in my case, making blood sugar APIs, and authentication, authorization, logging, kind of the aspect-oriented programming, the slice, the horizontal slice over my vertical. It could end up being 60, 70% of my code, but it's just not my expertise. That's not what I want to focus on. You
are not focusing on your business value, or whatever the value is you're trying to provide in your API. You're wasting time there. I think a company I really admire that did a good job of this was Auth0, the identity company. Mm-hmm. When they started, and we both know the founders of that company, when they started, small businesses weren't using, they were just using open source. And now 95%, I talk to lots of startups every day, 95% of them are using Auth0 or something similar. Because it just makes sense. Like, don't build this stuff yourself. It's actually much more cost effective to find a cost effective cloud solution where You don't write that code. It's managed for you. It's security sensitive. You'll save a lot more time. You'll be more productive, and you can put your engineers working on something that really matters, that's going to differentiate you in the market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to keep using my blood sugar API as the example because it's the one I have. It uses Open API, Swagger, and it's an understood one. It exists in one place. It exists in a data center in Chicago. But Zuplo, you're basically running that gateway on the edge, which means, hundreds of data centers around the world. The goal there being within, what I assume the speed of light, some small number of milliseconds to anybody on the planet. Are you caching then? You're acting as a proxy. And then how do you identify whether my blood sugar should be cached or not?
So we sort of leave that to you. The caching is definitely an option. So, that when you deploy Zuplo, within about 6 seconds, typically, always under 20 seconds, we deploy you to 300 data centers around the world. And the tagline is, within 50 milliseconds of every human on Earth, except the ISS and Antarctica. I don't think there's too many customers there, so NASA might not show up.
Both of the people down there who are needing
exactly. Yeah, they could just wait a little bit longer for their call. Caching is hard, because it's like famously one of the two hard things about software naming and caching validation.
Right, and off by one errors.
I actually think prioritization is the hardest thing in software. So that's because I was a product manager for a long time. The caching thing is hard. What we've done with Zuplo is make it super programmable. So as an engineer, you can come in and use your developer superpowers and write code very easily that feels native to you. So if you've ever written what do you call them in ASP.NET, like web handlers and the middleware pieces you can write, it feels very similar to writing that. And it's all using open standards like response and request that you would use in the browser. We make it insanely easy to program it, and you can use our cache programmatically. So if you want to do anything smart there about deciding when or not to cache that or fancy expiration, you can write that typically in a couple of lines of TypeScript.
Mm-hmm. And you made that comment before about rate limiting, right? Being in someone else's poorly written for loop. Are you, in that case, absorbing the traffic and preventing the traffic from actually hitting the origin? You're trying to basically say, hey, this person's API key, they're only a silver customer, not a platinum customer, so they're only allowed to hit us 5 times a second.
Yep.
Or whatever. I assume those rules are totally flexible.
Yeah, exactly. So we have some built in, like you can just set a simple policy that's like, 500 requests a minute or whatever for per user or per IP address. And you can layer those policies to give you different types of protection. But because of that programmability, one of the cool things that our customers really like about that is dynamic rate limiting. So in a couple of lines of script, you can say, what is this, a premium customer, a free customer? How do you want the rate limiter to, or the quota engine, etc., to respond and deal with that? And that's a big differentiator. That's actually one of our most, you wouldn't know, it's quite simple to use, but our most complicated pieces of infrastructure, because building a distributed, synchronized rate limiter that works well across 300 data centers it's quite a challenge. It's quite a thing. But yeah, it's certainly a very popular feature.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, because you're right. If someone is trying to be evil or naughty in some way, whether they be inadvertently naughty in the poorly written for loop, or they're consciously trying to do it, they're going to be bouncing all over the place, hitting different zones. And you still want your rate limiting to work, whether they're appearing from different locations or not.
Yeah, so we actually have a couple of modes there to make this very flexible for folks. Now, look, we are competing against the speed of light. That is a thing. I'm working on it, but we have not solved that yet. So there's some time for these things to synchronize, and I can't guarantee. We choose fail fast, so we will let an extra call go through. We don't want to deny. It's bad to take your API down if you don't need to. You don't want to do that. But it's very fast, actually, the synchronization, so we can keep people in line. But the other thing we do to actually improve the latency of your API, we have 2 modes of rate limiting. One is synchronous. So we will block the call doing anything until we've completed the check to see if this rate limit is good. It's very fast. It's like milliseconds. But we have an async mode as well, where if this data center has seen that this particular key is blocked before, we will immediately say no. But if we've not, what we'll do is we'll let the request to the backend start to proceed whilst we do the rate limiting check, removing any additional latency. And then only if we get the rate limit check back will we sort of block out that data center for that user, and we can hold back the response or send it. So the downside for you is you might get a couple of extra requests, but it's probably fine. But you don't get latency on every single request that your customer's doing, which is what you want, right? So we spent a lot of time thinking about edge design patterns for edge compute and how to build an edge gateway. We had to build this thing from the ground up, by the way. Like most gateways are kind of, Nginx or Envoy under the hood. Ours was built from scratch. A couple of open source packages and so on. But
I want to move to standards, because Open API is a standard. And whether you were building with SOAP, as I was many, many years ago, right? Or any IDL, any interface definition language, you're effectively describing a lollipop. This was the way we used to do this, if you recall. For those that, of course, can't see us because we're on an audio medium, you would basically draw a square and you'd say, that's the blood sugar database, or that's the library database, and you draw a lollipop. And the lollipop was the interface by which you would talk to that black box. And the great thing about an API is that you can't see what's inside because it doesn't matter what's inside as long as you can access it through that handle, through that lollipop. OpenAPI is that lollipop. Now, if I wrote my own OpenAPI specification, my own document, and then I go and I get an API proxy like Zuplo, you might make a change to it. You might improve it. You might expand on it. Which one then becomes the authoritative source? Which one is real? Because from the point of view of the outside, yours is authoritative. But as the programmer, I wrote it, so mine should be authoritative.
That's a great question, actually. So when we launched Zuplo, we did what every other gateway does, and we had some sort of proprietary storage mechanism for what defined the routes in the gateway. And from my time actually working on Azure API management, I wasn't really a fan of OpenAPI. I think it was called Swagger back then. We were in version 2. It was kind of a mess. There was a lot of competition from other formats like RAML, I think was one of them, and Blueprint. And so I didn't come into it excited about OpenAPI, but then I just kept bumping into this is what everybody was using now, thanks to this motion, the idea of like shift left, if you're familiar with that term, and design first, where you kind of design the API first. And we started to realize this was a really important part of people's workflow. So we rewrote a big part of the gateway to make it natively powered by OpenAPI. And one of the key things we tried to solve with that is this workflow issue of like, what's the master document? So there's kind of two ways people do it. Essentially, the way Zuplo works is you take your standard OpenAPI doc, you can import it into Zuplo, and then as you change things about how you want us to handle it, we will add extensions. So fortunately, OpenAPI is an extensible specification. We will add extensions. You can then, if you like, make Zuplo your master document because other tools will just ignore those extensions because it's not familiar with them. But we also built another flow. If you're, say, using like a tool like Stoplight or Swagger Hub to edit your OpenAPI, or you're doing it manually, you can continue to do that. And then if you come back and try to import the document again, what we'll do is we'll do a smart diff and we'll keep all the extensions, but we'll overwrite everything else that you bring in, and we can match on path or operation ID, etc. So, actually, our customers that do design first, they rave about this capability and just sort of how smooth it is compared to what they're seeing in a lot of other gateways. Is this kind of one-off translation into the proprietary format. So the fact we're natively powered for it, I think, is a bit of a superpower for OpenAPI users.
Nice. So then you're using like vendor extensions to extend the spec without overwriting what I think of as my source of truth.
Exactly that. Yeah.
That's cool. Because, whenever you have a relationship with a vendor, you're going to always feel squishy about, are they taking over? I like to do interface first. I like to design the OpenAPI specs, but other people might just want to generate them by the shape of whatever their implementation is. So having choice to do both of those is pretty cool.
We're not competing to be like the best OpenAPI design tool, but we do have a route designer, we call it, in the product. And so even our customers that aren't using OpenAPI, when they come in and use that design tool, they don't know it, but they're building an OpenAPI document. And some have then found the joy of like, cool, I've actually got started with OpenAPI and now I'm able to, because you can use OpenAPI for a lot of things. I call it the wheel of fortune, actually. Like, it's good for designing, but it actually enables you to do mocking and automate testing. There's lots and lots of like capabilities that light up if you kind of anchor your API world around a standard like OpenAPI. That's the only one I would do now, to be honest. The others have mostly faded away. So getting people into that world is sort of a thing we talk about a lot when we go to conferences. We try and get folks excited about like getting the most out of OpenAPI in general.
You worked on Azure, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, but how could you make an API gateway that is good on every cloud?
Yeah, actually what we do there is we run on CDN Edge networks. So when you deploy Zuplo, there is none of this like region anxiety, I call it, where I'm like, do I want to be in US East, or do I want to be here, or do I want to pay twice and be in this place? You go to Zuplo, you do a commit to Git. So we're GitOps powered. We work like Vercel and Netlify. In under 20 seconds of you making that commit, we will deploy a new environment for you. You can have unlimited environments. So, some of our customers have 250 concurrent environments, like previews that they just spin up for a little minute and then take down. And that is deployed to 300 data centers around the world. And those data centers are everywhere. There's one next to me right here in Seattle. There's one in Oregon. There's always one near all the major data centers, and they're connected via very fat pipes from these sort of CDN networks like Cloudflare and Fastly and so on. So when you deploy to one region, you deploy to Earth. We like to say you are everywhere all at once, all of the time.
Interesting. And the pricing would be the same? Because like I imagine there being some kind of a slider bar connected to my credit card. And I'm going to lose no matter what happens.
Ironically, if you want to run on less data centers, I'll push you into the enterprise plan and charge you a little bit more. But being everywhere is our cheapest option. Our free customers have insane high availability and are in 300 data centers around the world.
Okay, so being in other data centers is cool, but I've had people on the show lately who are starting to move away from the cloud. I had a great conversation with the folks from StoryGraph, which is a Goodreads compete. It's a really great thing called StoryGraph, and they moved off the cloud entirely and are now on bare metal, there's a bit of a bare metal renaissance going on. And they and I are fans of WireGuard. I'm actually a fan of Tailscale, and I invest in Tailscale as a point of note. So what if I want an API gateway, but I also want to run it on bare metal and I want to have it in my house?
So DHH, is it Ruby guy, and has just taken his company Basecamp and so on off cloud. A bunch of our customers are running on bare metal. You mentioned WireGuard. We actually that's our solution. So we have a really great hybrid solution for Zuplo where we call it secure tunneling. You install an agent in your on-prem data center or in your AWS VPC or your Azure VPC that punches out using WireGuard directly to Zuplo. It's our most secure option. It's used by some of our biggest customers. And it, again, creates this sort of great management separation, actually, because one of the things you want is you typically want your SecOps team at a large company managing the connectivity. So they'd look after the subscription that houses the tunnel. You don't want your SecOps people dealing with changes to the gateway. Like they don't care about the endpoints and what the rate limiting is set to. That's something you want your API engineers to deal with. And so that separation actually is also really nice just from a sort of architectural management deployment at large enterprises. But yeah, we have lots of customers on private data center running on Equinix and so on, the whole spread.
Really? So the back end doesn't really matter. Like sometimes you'll go to a website of a company, you'll go, oh, I wonder if it supports Erlang, or I wonder if it does my obscure thing, like we're all looking, they won't have .NET or they won't have Go, and then I'll feel sad that I can't have my, my thing written in my language. But I presume that since everything is HTTP and open standards, you don't really care.
No, I mean, I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, but I mean, the only thing is the gateway is programmable, but you have to write that in TypeScript today. We don't do .NET today, but it's pretty easy. But yeah, no, the actual API itself can be written in anything, as you said, as long as it does HTTP today. We'll do sockets in the future, but for now it's HTTP.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, and I want to, I have to be a good interviewer, so I want to push. Zuplo is not a name that people might be familiar with because you are a startup or a smaller company. You're not Google Cloud Logging. You're not Datadog.
Yep.
How do you have a company that is of a middle size and then work with these other ones? Is it about plugins? Is it about making sure that you support other vendors, for example, for live logging and things like that?
I mean, that's exactly right. So, and we think that's a better solution, honestly. You want all your logs from this thing in one place. We have analytics built into Zuplo, but we don't think it's sort of a selling feature. If you're a bigger company and you're using Datadog, just use one of our integrations and we'll start pumping the data over there. That is the thing customers really love, actually, with Zuplo, is just how slick our integrations with Sumo Logic and Dynatrace and, all of these platforms are. And the sort of the single pane of glass view they have of the whole ecosystem. We have, I've forgotten the name of it now, but there's a name for when you have tracing that we're context tracing through a whole request.
Oh, like open telemetry?
Exactly. So we do OTel, and then there's another name for it. I'm blanking on it now, unfortunately, for this actual idea of context tracing.
Oh, observability.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So that's one of the folks. They go through a few phases. They tend to come to us because they love the GitOps story and the Edge story, particularly if they're multi-cloud. And honestly, most big companies are multi-cloud by accident because they do an acquisition.
That's so true. Pause for a second here, because multi-cloud sometimes feels like a lie. Because some people I feel like they're like, we're going to have a multi-cloud solution. Like what? Like one of the clouds is going to disappear? We're just going to hold our finger on the chess piece. We're not going to make an actual move here. It's not that. It's they got a new group, or they did an acquire and hire, and then suddenly they've got AWS and Azure and GCP all in the same place. It's not that they would actually want that.
I mean, there's a couple of customers who lean in so much to high availability. They don't want to be dependent on one cloud, like it's rare though. And it's harder than people think to do that. Like it's very hard. But yeah, no, what we've seen is, hey, we were all in an Azure, but then we acquired this company who's all in GCP, and moving it is just a nightmare. So we're not going to do it. So now we're multi-cloud. And then they're looking at gateways and like, look at this thing. Oh, this is cool. This works for everything. And they like the experience.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you that I've been struggling with my little blood sugar thing is that I've got these API keys, and they're different ones. I'll have like a key for read only, and I'll have a key for admin. And sometimes I'll accidentally leak one of them on a YouTube video. So I'll be showing my blood sugar thing, and then I don't know if some people have my keys.
Right.
And I've been a little concerned about that. And I don't really know. I guess I could go in the logs and start doing some analysis to figure out if I'm seeing, unusual behavior on a particular key. But if that was going to be thousands of customers, I could get really abused if just one or two keys made it out into the world like a little outbreak monkey.
Yeah. So definitely analytics is a thing there. Is like so in Zuplo, for example, you can go in, look at the activity from a given user, which would map to a key, and then you'll see the spread of IP addresses and locations and so on, and be able to zone in on activity. We actually have a fully sort of integrated API key offering where we will generate the keys. We give users self-serve management of those keys, so you don't have to build it, so they can roll their key, they can view analytics for the key. The other cool thing we did is we leaned in with GitHub and did secret scanning on our keys. So even our free customers get this. So if you're a Zuplo customer, you're using our API key solution, and one of your customers accidentally checks their key into GitHub, that's how they leak, honestly. That's how keys get leaked. Then we get notified by GitHub, and we will automatically revoke that key, send you a webhook, send you a Slack message, send you an email, depending on your settings. And that's included. Even our free customers take advantage of that. So that's what, API keys, I think, are a really great solution for B2B and entity to entity communication on an API. If you're doing it on behalf of a person, you should probably be using JOT tokens. But API keys, all the big APIs use them, Stripe, etc. They're great. But you do need to go a little bit further to get a really secure solution. And so that's one of the things we try and offer out of the box again.
So when you say the way you pronounced that was JOT tokens, that's JWT?
That's JWT. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I want to make sure because, sometimes people don't, who are getting into this space, they might not understand why is JWT so important and why has it really made a big move in the last maybe 3 or 4 years? It's gone from being like hard to being required and a standard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is required for APIs. I think if the API interaction is between an entity or an organization, sort of machine to machine, I actually think API keys is a better solution where you have these opaque tokens. And there's a bit of a debate about, well, is it as secure? That's a bit of a religious discussion because some people would argue that JOTs are less secure because anyone can base64 decrypt that token and then look inside and get some sense of what this thing might be doing. Whereas the nice thing about an API key is it's completely opaque. JOTs are harder to revoke in typically because you either have to do things like revoke the whole certificate, which means everyone's JOT suddenly goes bad, whereas an API key can be self-managed and revoked. JOTs are great because they're part of the OpenID standard and OpenID Connect. And so, I think that's one of the things that's really nice about them. And that's a much better flow if the thing that's calling your API is a person. It's like, it's Scott Hanselman. It's not Hansel Minutes, which would be an organization. It's Scott Hanselman, and there might be multiple people at Hansel Minutes that are calling as an individual. Then it's a cleaner solution for that. And I think one of the main things going for it, honestly, is it's a standard. And it's one thing API keys lack today, and I think why people think they might not be as secure. I'd take that fight. But we support JOT too, by the way. We have lots of customers using JOT tokens with Zuplo. But I think being part of OpenID Connect and just how mature and, it's the only way to do it today, right? If you have any user sign in.
If someone has got an API at their office, they're working on an API, and maybe they have some of these things, they have some basic rate limiting, they have some basic auth, they've rolled their own. How would they know that they need a gateway in front of them? Like, what would they be thinking about, and how would they even talk to their boss and say, there's another thing we need. We need another product, because bosses are always trying to simplify and remove products, not add new ones.
Yeah, I mean, if they're doing things like rolling their own API key authentication, that's instantly a bit of a red flag. This is hard. You got to encrypt stuff. There's like a lot of rules to do this well. It's like, would you roll your own user database password store today? I think that's less common. It still happens.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't do that. Rate limiting is hard. The common mistake people make is they use a simple rate limiter that runs on a per node basis. But then guess what happens? You set up an autoscaler, and an API management product that we won't name does this. And as nodes get added, then you add more rate limiters, so the count goes up proportionally. So it's not actually working in rate limiting. Like, this stuff is really hard to do well. Don't waste your time on it. So I think that, like, as certainly as you start to hit scale, you're going to find like rate limiting a really challenging problem. And then there's other things you get out of the box when you start to go into here. Like, one of the things we do in Zuplo a lot with the programmability is we help people build very slick custom roles-based access control systems that work for them. And it's typically just a couple of lines of code that you can put in the gateway. And once you've got that abstract, like, your gateway is an abstraction layer. We love abstraction layers in software, right? Generally. And once you've got that, it really does become a bit of a superpower as new requirements come up to allow you to keep your actual front-end API separated somewhat from the implementation. And so you're just going to move a lot faster. You're going to have clearer separation of concerns and a lot more flexibility in terms of how you do cool and interesting things in the gateway.
Very cool. Well, cool and interesting things are exactly what I want to do. And if I can, ship an API faster, make it easier, anything that lets me be still, like, I always joke about Hanselman International, and like, we're global. It's one guy. It's 3 websites. You know what I mean? But I want to feel like a 10x developer, because a 10x developer is a nonsense statement. It's the tools that the 10x developer uses that make you feel like, wow, back in the day, we used to hire a consultant to do that. And now I can sign up for free, proxy this in front, and then boom. You know what I mean? Like, when I put a CDN on Hanselman, it changed the whole game.
Did it? Wow.
Oh my God. It's just stupid stuff like that.
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
The site's slow in India. Okay, what can I do to fix that? I'm one guy. Well, I could deploy to India, but I could also put a CDN in front of the main parts, and now the site's faster. You know what I mean? Those kind of things, tools like that. Well, as you said, one additional layer of abstraction is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
That sounds like you're doing some really great stuff at Zuplo, and folks can check you out at zuplo.com. Thank you so much, Josh Twist, for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Scott. Great to see you again.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.